Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of appropriate ages, get ready for the AZA Commander Podcast.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the AZA Commander Podcast, where we talk about the Magic the Gathering Commander format. My name is A Zombie Apocalypse. You can find my gameplay videos of Magic the Gathering and other games on Twitch and YouTube.
Hello there, friends. My name is Generex. Sometimes people call me Tim, although I'm still trying to figure out why exactly. I occasionally stream MTG Arena on Twitch, and you can also find me playing Commander with Zombie and some other randos on his Twitch and YouTube streams.
Before we get started today, we want to remind you the best way to support the podcast is to watch this and other videos on YouTube and tune into our streams on Twitch. Links are in the description below. So what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to do our second deck tech episode. We're going to take turns introducing a deck we're currently playing, including why we chose the commander, what we designed the deck to do, how these decks have changed over time, and where we think they stand now in terms of power level and effectiveness. But before we get started, as part of our court-ordered community service obligations, here is another public service announcement.
The views expressed in the AZA Commander Podcast are just the opinions of two overly enthusiastic Magic the Gathering players. All card choices made by the host are objectively correct and therefore above questioning and discussion. Any attempts to contradict the host could result in sadness, vomiting, dry mouth, poison counters, social isolation, commander damage, lightheadedness, and possibly game loss. Please consult with your physician before arguing with the flawless logic of the host. Thank you and have a great day. So, Tim, who is the commander you're talking about today?
So today I am bringing Hidetsugu and Kairi. So this is a newer commander. It is from March of the Machine. It's one of the pair-up commanders. So they're, it's Hidetsugu, the demon, and Kairi, the dragon, working together to fight off the Phyrexian horde. So it is 2 blue, and a black, 5 total, for a 5/4 flying ogre demon dragon. So when Hidetsugu and Kairi enter the battlefield, you draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So Brainstorm on ETB. And then when Hidetsugu and Kairi dies, exile the top card of your library. Target opponent loses life equal to its mana value. If it's an instant or sorcery, you may cast it without paying its mana cost.
That's spicy. So what is the rule 0 to your deck?
So when talking rule 0, obviously power level is going to be part of the conversation. I do think because of how strong some of the plays in this deck are and how it ends up being kind of like a combo deck, I do think that it fits, out of 10 somewhere in the 7.5 range. The only reason it isn't even higher than that, I think, is due to its speed, which is to say it is relatively slow. And I do actually think that you can interact with the combo pretty simply and impact it in a pretty significant way. So when I'm talking about the deck, I tell people it is a combo deck that focuses on using the commander's abilities, both the ETB and the dice trigger. Power level is approximately 7.5 due to slow speed combined with huge plays. I also mentioned that the deck can be really circular in how the combo works, and so it can take some long turns as a result. So I would just warn people ahead of time, I'm going to do my very best to move through it quickly, but there's a lot of things going on to that make it harder to do it quickly.
Yeah, I just think you have to be careful with the word combo because people are going to assume you mean infinite combos, and that's clearly not what this deck is doing.
It doesn't race to it. No. We definitely will talk about that in greater detail later. There is one I say that there's one infinite combo. There are a couple of different cards that slot into the different pieces. But, I mean, I don't necessarily agree that combo immediately equals infinite.
Yeah, some people just get scared from that word,
Well, sure, but, when you think about the different types of deck, combo is one of those types of deck. Right. This is not a mid-range deck that's trying to outvalue my opponents. It's not an aggro deck that's trying to be faster than everybody else. It's not a control deck that's trying to make sure that nobody else is doing anything. It is a deck that works in a fishbowl and performs a specific combo that will win me the game. So it is, strictly speaking, a combo deck.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. So what is it that attracted you to this commander?
So I was looking for a new Dimir commander. Previous to this, I had been playing Wilhelm the Rock Cleaver, which, as everybody knows, is a pretty common Dimir commander. It's kind of zombie tribal, and I just really wasn't feeling it as kind of for my playstyle. And I'm the type of player where my goal is to have commander decks that play differently. You have to pilot the decks differently because the goal and the playstyle of each is different. So what attracted me to this one, on the card, it says the magic words without paying its mana cost. So playing spells for free on your commander feels very good. I saw this one when it was spoiled for March of the Machine. I was looking for something in Dimir colors. This has that element of, and there's other Dimir commanders that are similar to this one in that they do that big thing where the mana value of the card matters. So, but the dealing with the ETB and the dice trigger, trying to make the top card of your library, it's a unique deck building challenge, and I really had a lot of fun putting it together for that reason. And then the last thing that I want to point out is that you can use the I said the commander rule. You can use the legend rule to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
With this commander, and I think that is that's something that we don't get to do a whole heck of a lot, so there's abusing that feels like a really fun thing to do, and it has turned out to be a fun thing to do because the deck is really fun when those things happen,
especially nowadays when you have that Teamer Dragon that lets you make tokens and they're not legendary. You have Ratadrabic, you have Cataract, you have all these things that are make them not legendary anymore. But you are embracing the only one, and it's fantastic. It's a great thing to see. So, go ahead.
There's at least one card in the deck that does that makes a non-legendary copy of it. It's Vesuvan Duplimancy. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that I think it's fun, and I think that making non-legendary copies of Hidetsugu of the commander here it can be really, really fun and really powerful, but I think that you can only have so much of that, and when I have done that, I've really always kind of want the commander to die, kinda. So to get the dice trigger, you need it to die. So legend rule is a really kind of free way, a game state way of doing that.
That's great. So was there a theme or a build limit that you applied to the deck?
So I know that combo decks, as you pointed out, they kind of give people that kind of wincy thing where they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to play against that. It can be combo decks can be unfun to play against when the person's fishbowling for a really long time, when it really feels like a circular thing. And so I wanted to the best of my ability, to cut down on the things that I know are not fun to play against. And I think as a result, I actually built a deck that is probably better at interacting and better at kind of I don't know. I think it might actually be stronger because some of the limitations I put on. So one of the limitations, and most people would argue this did not make it stronger, was that I'm not playing any extra turn spells. And because really, extra turn spells in a deck like this are just backbreaking, because I would be able to effectively untap and start everything that I'm doing all over again, especially if I get one of the effects that allows me to copy it every turn, and there's a couple of them in there, but it's kind of a once per turn situation. So if I were taking extra turns, it would make everything. But I know that's a pet peeve of mine. I know most tables are not super keen on the extra turns thing, so I immediately said I'm not going to play extra turn spells. I also recently, you and I have talked plenty about this in other episodes and in our own conversations, I've cut down on the amount of tutors that I'm playing just across the board, and I actually set out to not put any in this deck. There aren't. I don't believe that there's any, strictly speaking, actual tutors.
Search for a card, not fetch lands don't count as tutors in my opinion.
So I would say that the one glaring exception is Solemn Simulacrum. So do we count that as a tutor? I think most people.
You're a monster.
Right. Most people would say no. But other than that, I think I had a few when I first got started, and I just moved away from it as I went. The other thing was I'm not playing with any kind of steal your stuff spells. There are definitely things I could have done there. spell type effects that allow you to grab a permanence from your opponents. There's definitely or kind of play play things from your opponent's deck. There's lots of that stuff in Dimir. We play almost exclusively over spelltable. Those effects are really, really janky and difficult to play in that way. If it's paper, it's a lot easier, but when it's not, it's a pain in the butt. So I actually just excluded that stuff as well. And I also try to be conscious not to put like overly complicated cards because the combo is already complicated, and I probably failed at that last one. Like to put that build limit in proved impossible because the way that this deck runs is just complex on its face. So I tried to just be mindful of it as I was making choices, but ultimately like it's complicated.
It turns out Magic the Gathering is a pretty complicated game.
And when you have a commander that has and it enters the battlefield trigger and a dice trigger and those things and they're very wordy and complicated triggers, yes, it makes it that much harder.
Especially if you're doing it multiple times in a turn too.
That's right.
So why don't you give me the stat breakdown of your deck?
So when we do this, we talk about all the different like kind of normal card types, card draw, ramp, single target removal, and board wipes. And I gotta say that in this deck, I think all of the numbers are at least a little bit on the low side. And when you think about card draw, this one's really tough. So the actual number of spells that cause me to draw cards or kind of give me card advantage, kind of in a vacuum is 8. However, there are so many cards that copy my commander, and if those cards resolve, they have a brainstorm attached to them. So they all end up adding a card draw in there, so it really skews that number a lot. So 8 card draw spells, 12 ramp spells, almost exclusively artifact ramp. The only exception there, well, I guess Solemn Simulacrum is an artifact. So really the only exception is Dark Ritual. Which it is kind of fast mana, but it's one shot fast mana. It's really, if I can get my commander out on the second or third turn, that's bananas, but it usually still takes me a while to set up. Single targeted removal, really not a lot. Just very, very, it is a combo deck. It's just really trying to do what it's trying to do. It doesn't spend a lot of time interacting with other people. That 6 targeted removal does not count the 3 counter spells in the deck. And then finally, there are 2 board wipes. It should be mentioned, though, that the board wipes are spectacular board wipes. Yeah. They're not, damnation. It's Decree of Pain, which almost always gets cast at full power. And
but don't mention it's also free.
Right, and in Garrick's Wake, which destroys all of everybody else's stuff, but not my own. It's not symmetrical, and also usually I'm casting them for free. So they're gigantic board wipes, but there's only 2 of them.
So what is the goal of the deck?
So we've talked about the commander and what it does. The goal here is to copy the commander so that you get both the ETB and the dice triggers at the same time. So this is a little tricky, and when we talk about timing rules, this one is one of the more complex ones that happens. So you have your commander already on board, already resolved, sitting on the table. If you copy that commander with a spell or with a clone, you legend rule it. But what happens is that the legend rule acts in a different way, and the ETB trigger, actually, you can't put it on the stack until the legend rule question has been resolved. That gets resolved first before you're allowed to put anything on the stack. So what ends up happening is that the ETB trigger and the dice trigger both are going to go onto the stack at the same time. And because they're going at the same time, you get to choose the order. So this is what makes this kind of complicated, is that you have to be mindful of which one are you going to do first. I almost always end up doing it ETB trigger, then dies, resolving in that order, so that you know what the top card is going to be. But there are actually situations where you already know what the top one is.
Right.
So you want to go ahead and cast that spell, and then you want to do it again. So again, copy the commander, get the dies trigger, which allows you to cast an instant or sorcery for free, and then hilarity ensues, and then hilarious things happen, and the big spells go off, and oftentimes those big spells are continuing the cycle. And remember, every time you cast a spell off of that dies trigger, somebody is taking the mana value of that spell right to the face.
Right to the dome.
So next I'll kind of break down, now that we've talked about the goal of the deck, each of those different things that I was talking about. So we're going to talk about the cards that I use to copy things. We're going to talk about the big spells I'm trying to cast. We're going to talk about the hilarious things the deck can do. And then I'll kind of wrap up with the way that the deck can finish the game. Or things that are built in to make sure that I can close it out. So the copy cards, one way of doing what we're trying to do here is to get the death trigger for the commander is you can use feign death style cards. So you can use things like feign death just costs 1 black. It's an instant. Until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So there's a lot of different cards that read very similarly to this and cost a similar amount at this point. There's a whole bunch of
7 or 8 of them now, right?
Well, so I think that there might even be more than that if you're willing to go up to 2 in the mana cost. And I think so. I have 1, 2. I think I have at least 4. Now I'm seeing 5. So I think there's 5 that cost a single black mana. And I think I have a total of 6 of these cards in the deck. So I play with the 5 that cost 1, and I play with 1 that costs 2 but makes a treasure.
So essentially cost 1.
Right. So I'm trying to play with only the cheapest ones. I actually started with way more than that because if you're willing to go to 2, I think there's closer to 10 of them available.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the idea of the idea of letting your commander die, but it comes back immediately. I think it's just a really cool idea.
So the deck plays with a bunch of those Feign Dial Seth cards and a bunch of sack outlets. So for sack outlets, just a couple of examples. We've got Ashnod's Altar, Carrion Feeder, and everybody's favorite Viscera Seer. So Viscera Seer is just 1 black for a 1/1 vampire wizard. You sacrifice a creature and scry 1. So what matters the most is that this is a sack outlet that allows you to sacrifice a creature at instant speed that you don't have to pay any mana to do. So it's free. So all of the sack outlets in the deck want to be free and preferably repeatable. So those are a couple examples of those. So Feign Death style sack outlet allows you to cast the spell, sacrifice your commander, get the dice trigger, get it back, and then get the ETB again.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love everything that you're telling me right now.
So I also play with a fair amount of copy spells, and I believe that the copy spells are probably the most important part of the deck. Like having an instant or a sorcery that copies the commander, it really does exactly what the deck wants to do because you can hit it off of the dice trigger and cast it, and it also continues the loop. So right off the top, we've got Cackling Counterpart, Quasi-Duplicate, both 3 mana spells that copy target creature. And my personal favorite, which has really been an all-star every time I've played it, is Stolen Identity. So this is 4 blue for a sorcery. You create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature, and then you cipher. So you can exile the spell encoded onto the creature, and whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you can cast the encoded spell again.
I don't know. I think that belongs in the hilarity ensues, but if that's not hilarity, I want to know what is.
It really does, and there is it does. It's just the best copy spell, so I wanted to mention it here. It is definitely the one that I want to get. There's another one that's similar that is an enchantment that does something very, very similar. So that as I was saying before, if I played with extra turn spell and I managed to resolve this and get it onto the commander, I'm getting this every time I hit somebody. Yeah. So there's just so much kind of looping combo going on at that point. And then finally in the copy cards section, we've got the actual clones. And right now there's just a small handful of them, and they're really just the cheapest ones that exist. So Mirror Image, Phantasmal Image, All-Star Glass Pool Mimic. I call this one the All-Star because it is the MDFC, the multi, the double-faced card, so it can be a land when you need it to. And it is also just happens to be a clone, so it fits into the deck. Just a slam dunk as far as card choices go for this deck.
Yeah, I mean, you also don't have that many creatures, so it's really interesting how you can get away with having so many sack outlets and like so little creatures, and yet everything just seems to work and tie itself together. And Chef's Kiss is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. So the next section is the big spells. What's the biggest, most splashiest things that I want to be doing when I am resolving that dice trigger for Hidetsugu. So when I first built the deck, there were a couple of cards that came out of that same set that came out of March of the Machine, and this is kind of popping off in standard right now. I think it's a fantastic card. It's Breach the Multiverse. So, Breach the Multiverse, 5 black, 7 total, so 7 damage if you're casting it off the dice trigger. Each player mills 10 cards. For each player, choose a creature or planeswalker in that player's graveyard. Put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Then each creature you control becomes a Phyrexian in addition to its types.
That card's awesome.
I know I said I wasn't playing with Steal Your Stuff. I feel like reanimating stuff from your graveyard is the most acceptable version of stealing your stuff.
Yeah, you're not taking it off the battlefield. Like,
right. And again, like the fact that I get something from everybody in Commander makes this card so much fun, and it makes it so that I'm playing a little bit of a different game every time. So 7 damage, get a creature or planeswalker out of every person's graveyard, including my own.
Oh no!
So if my commander happens to go to the graveyard in this process, and I happen to hit Multiverse, I get to reanimate my commander in addition to all these other things. Another big hit is Rise of the Dark Realms. Very, very similar in this regard, and I'm just getting everybody's creatures back. I do have a very, very small amount of kind of mill sub-theme in the deck. Altar of Dementias in the deck as a free sack outlet. But I'm not really. That's not the main line or the major game plan. But it does happen. People put stuff in their own graveyards. Board wipes happen. People mill themselves. This stuff happens all the time. So Rise of the Dark Realms can really be, 9 mana, 7 black. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. This could be a very polarizing card. Some people are very happy to see it. Some people are very salty to see it.
So 2 out of the 3 biggest cards steal other people's stuff by accident.
Right. So as I said, when I was doing the steal your stuff thing, I was like, reanimating your creatures from your graveyard feels like that's okay. That's okay.
It's not blatant thievery.
Right. It's not blatant thievery. That's right. And then finally, I saved this one for last, even though alphabetically it's first in the big spells, because I really do think for a $2 card, like two and a quarter, this card is so powerful, and it's Aminatu's Augury. So 6 and blue, 8 total. Exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a land from among them onto the battlefield until end of turn. For each non-land card type, you may cast a card of that type from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. So there's the magic words again.
So I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. Timing restrictions do apply for this.
They do. So if you follow the spell through, the land gets put into the battlefield as a part of the resolution of the spell.
Right.
And then it puts that clause until end of turn for each non-land card type. You may cast a card from exile, without paying its mana cost. So it kind of highlights all those cards in exile and says you can pay one of each or play one of each of these different types throughout the course of the whole time. So
let's just hope you don't accidentally cast this on an opponent's turn.
Right.
I love your big spells. They're great.
Yeah, you're right, and I hadn't actually considered that. That's an excellent point. It hasn't come up yet, but I'll have to keep an eye out for it.
Right.
If it is not happening, the land is coming in, and I could cast an instant or anything else that followed those timing rules, but it's just until the end of that turn. So unless it follows the timing rules, I would not be able to do it. It's an excellent point.
I love classic big spells, man. Like who doesn't love them? That's what Commander's all about. And the highlight that you gave was just a perfect amalgamation of what the deck's capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. So next we'll talk about what are the hilarious things. We've already kind of breached into that subject a little bit, into that multiverse a little bit. So the first one that I have to point out, this is the obvious choice I think for this deck, is Rite of Replication. This kicked, which I'm actually not even sure that I pulled it off and actually playing the deck.
Not yet, but I can't wait. I can't
Right.
wait.
So 5 copies means I get 5 legend ruled brainstorm and then cast the top card, which really just means that I'm gonna do a whole lot this turn. Because every time I cast a spell, there's still all that stuff sitting under the stack waiting to happen. But I'm gonna resolve this stuff up here before that happens, and I'm gonna go down. That's why it gets so complicated to play this. But that's hilarious, when and if it happens.
So there's something interesting that I want to bring up at this point. If you get Rite of Replication off Hidetsugu's trigger, you can kick that spell even though you're casting the spell for free. So if you somehow got him back before the spell resolves, you can then just for 5 mana get 5 more Hidetsugus. It's amazing.
So and here's the thing. Let's say that I used one of those feign death type spells,
Right.
and I sacrificed Hidetsugu. There are 2 dice triggers at that point, and you get to choose the order they go off in. So you can have it so that the feign death style effect resolves first, and then the dice trigger resolves. So the commander is back on the battlefield. So the spell cast sees the commander in play.
So just to make sure, if that does happen, you would get the brainstorm trigger before.
That's right.
Right. So this is why this deck's so complicated, because since it has enters and dies, like if you're bringing it in or out at the same time, things just get jumbled, and it's really important that you kind of just like visualize the stack and almost have like cards to just represent what things are going to be.
It's true, and I've worked it out. I goldfished the deck enough on my own before I actually played it with other people, that I kind of taught myself how to do that. Taught myself to kind of figure out where in the stack it's going to be. I actually think like coming up with some like maybe some tokens to represent the stuff, it might be very, very useful in the future.
Because I mean, you're not going to run into reduke in your spell table games. I hate to tell you. So just to make sure everything is as clear as possible for your opponents makes just the game more enjoyable for everybody.
That's right, and like I try to explain the stuff that's going on as much as I possibly can, so that there isn't any. Because again, there's a lot of complexity here, and I understand that it's confusing. So the next hilarious thing is another one of these cards where I don't see, it doesn't see a lot of play because of how expensive it is, and it's Mnemonic Deluge. So this is 6 and blue, so 9 total. So big hit, one of the biggest hits, as a matter of fact, off of the dice trigger. It's a sorcery. It says exile target instant or sorcery from a graveyard. Copy that card 3 times. You may cast the copies without paying their mana cost. Exile Mnemonic Deluge.
3 times.
3 times. So we've already talked about some of the other hilarious things that this deck can do. Now imagine that I'm copying them 3 times.
That's
that I'm doing
absolutely terrifying.
Any of those things that I mentioned earlier. Breach the Multiverse, Amino Tuzagari, Rite of Replication, any of those things several times. Just so much going on. And so many triggers, so much value. It just gets really out of hand.
And you can hit any graveyard with that?
You can. It is card from a graveyard, which I said that out loud, and it's the first time I'm realizing that I can actually hit other people's graveyards if I need to. So I'm gonna keep that in mind next time if somebody's got something.
There you go, stealing people's stuff again.
Only from your graveyard, though. There's no law against grave robbing, okay?
Actually, I think there might be. Oh my god, that is hilarious. And what's the last card on the list you got for us?
Okay, the last one is Vesuvian Duplimancy. I talked about it earlier. This is an enchantment, 3 and a blue. Whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. So in this case, what Duplimancy does is if I'm using my copy spells on my commander, now I get a non-legendary copy on top of what I'm already doing.
I mean, the Feign Death thing's targeted too. Like, it's
It
just
is.
so many Hidetsugus.
It's what the deck does is that it puts the commander out and it targets it with a whole bunch of spells, either the Feign Death or the copy spells. So there's a lot of opportunity for this. I honestly, it's been a little hit or miss, but I think it's a lot of fun. Like, this to me is one way to kind of make the deck play a little bit more fairly. And I know that sounds good. So that sounds a little crazy out loud, but even if all I'm doing with my commander is making non-legendary copies of it, it's still a 5/4 flyer that brainstorms on enters the battlefield. So if I'm making a whole bunch of copies of that, it really that's going to give me an air force that can close out games if I'm not really being able to get the combo rolling for some reason. So I think that this is a good backup plan with all the other things that the deck is doing.
All right, and how are we finishing the games then?
So obviously, I can kill people with that damage. I'm going to have an army of Hidetsugus. It's going to swing for 5. Commander damage is definitely on the table because it's very hard to remove my commander once I've got it on the battlefield, because I'm going to do things like copy it in response, or I'm going to do things like feign death to keep it from dying. There's lots of different things going on there. I do have a little bit of counter magic backup as well, so it's really hard to get rid of once I've got it on there. There is sitting in the deck in a very, very sneaky fashion, one infinite combo. So it requires the commander. And there are actually 2 different reanimation spells that are in the deck that work with this combo, but the more important part is the other creature, which is Meldweb Curator. You can use Archaeomancer for this as well. I use the Curator because I just happen to have one, and it's also it's one of the newer cards. So and actually both of them are wizards, so they both work with Thwart the Grave. Anyway, Meldweb Curator, 3 and a blue, Phyrexian Wizard, which is going to be important. When Meldweb Curator enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library. So, you're casting a reanimation spell. Curator's one of those targets. When Curator comes back onto the battlefield, you're going to put the spell back on top of it. You're going to put the reanimation spell back on top. So the 2 spells that you can use, one of them is Rise of the Dark Realms, which we already talked about. The other one is Thwart the Grave, and this one's sneaky, and I'm going to take credit for it because I didn't see this in anybody else's heated deck. And I just sniffed it out because I was looking for another spell because it needs to reanimate 2 creatures. It needs to be able to reanimate the commander, and it needs to be able to reanimate Meldweb Curator. So Rise of the Dark Realm reanimates everything. So it's actually not the ideal choice.
Right.
Well, it doesn't do it for other people. That's why I don't play Living Death.
Oh, that makes sense.
Living Death works as well, but it gives everybody else their creatures back as well. So Thwart the Grave is 4 and 2 black. The spell costs 1 less for each creature up in your party, so it's a party time card. And you return target creature card and up to 1 cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it can get Hidetsugu and a wizard. Meldweb happens to be a wizard. So sack outlets in play. Commander and Meldweb on the battlefield. Actually, Meldweb could be in your graveyard. It doesn't matter at all. Right. Sacrifice the commander. Cast the reanimation spell off the top of your library. Commander and Meldweb come back. Put the reanimation spell back on top. You're throwing 6 damage every time this happens. It loops infinite. Yeah. So I think that there are others. I'm not saying these are the only 2 because, again, Living Death technically works as well, but I opted not to play it just because I thought it was too symmetrical. I thought, it was benefiting other people, and I just wanted to avoid that. So obviously Rise of the Dark Realms is in there because it's this big splashy card anyway. So it was gonna be in there. I put Thwart the Grave in there as another way to get to this combo. I don't have any tutors in the deck. I'm not really racing to the combo, but I want it to be there in case we get into one of those tangly games and I just need to close it out. So the other closers, one of them is Army of the Damned. Most people have seen this at some point or another. 5 and 3 black, another 8-drop sorcery. Create 13 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So 13 2/2s, that's quite a lot of damage. That's a big board. And if you can cast this spell more than once, you can get an army of zombies there. It really is exactly as it says on the tin. It
Almost
is
like
army.
you can have a zombie apocalypse on your board.
Right, you could. That's an interesting point. So like I really obviously it's a big expensive spell. So it fit in the deck anyway, but I actually do think that this is one of the really solid closers. Because just having an army of zombies, I've actually I've copied this with Mnemonic Deluge before and cast it 3 times.
Oh, that just hurts my brain.
Right. Like that's the ideal scenario.
That's idiot shutdown of the brain. Oh god.
And then finally, I consider this last entry to be a finisher, because it really it gives me the RB to kind of close out the game, and it's Shark Typhoon.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Because you are casting the spells. Any non-creature, so Shark Typhoon, 5 and a blue. It's an enchantment. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. X is the spell's mana value. It's got a cycling thing. Never going to happen in this deck. Like, I'm hard casting this deck to make sharks. That is absolutely what I'm doing. Like, only in the direst of situations to keep myself alive would I ever cycle this, because it is really meant to be there to make a giant shark every time I'm casting one of these big spells. And it's there to close out the game.
Worst parts about those sharks is that they fly.
It's crazy, right?
Sharknado! All right, so what has changed over time in the deck?
It's tough for me to answer this question, and I think that anybody listening along today will see a pretty stark difference in between my entry and your entry today, because this is one of my newest decks. Is it my newest deck? It is technically, not for long.
I was about to say, like, next week it won't be.
I got one in the tank, but yeah, this is my newest deck as of today. So I haven't made a lot of changes, but I did in the development stages. As I said before, I started with some steal your stuff effects. I'm not super fond of playing with those, so I took all of those out, or all of them that weren't stealing from your graveyard. I started with more creature clones, and I do think that there may actually be some room for some of those, but they just don't do the same thing because they're not spells. You can't cast them off of the dice trigger, so like I really ended up lowering the amount of those that were in the deck as well. So that's really all I've changed with it so far.
No, I mean, you also want just a really high density of instants and sorceries, so even if you don't get the best thing, you're at least getting something off his dice triggers. So you're just increasing the odds of hitting those things. So I think those changes make a lot of sense.
It might be interesting to look at. So there's current build, 16 creatures, not counting the commander, 16 sorceries, 20 instants.
No, that seems like a very good number.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the strengths and weaknesses to the deck that you have?
So the strength is it can play incredibly powerful spells for free. I mean, some of these spells you probably wouldn't consider including just because they're more expensive. There's more cost-efficient ways of doing these things. And to get a similar effect, how much better is this big effect than perhaps a lower one? But when you're casting them for free, you might as well go for the moon. And that I think is a really strong thing about the deck is, when you're casting a 8-drop spell to everybody else's 5 or 6 drop, there is going to be a power level difference. Another strength is that it just draws a lot of cards because copying the commander has a brainstorm built into it every time, and repeating that every turn is just very, very powerful. I could have mentioned this a moment ago. I had more straight up card draw spells. Noticeably missing from my deck list is Treasure Cruise.
Right.
I had it in there, And I often found that even with effects that, Reliquary Tower, things like that, I think I've got a Thought Vessel in the deck as well. Even with effects that make it so I don't have a hand size limit anymore, I just had more cards than I had any ability to do anything with. So having cards like Treasure Cruise in there were I wanted the card to do something other than just drawing cards.
Yeah, I mean that's a very fair thing. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've seen this deck played so many, like several times, and like the amount of times that your commander comes out into play is just absurd. Like that, like when your commander has card draw on it, you don't really need to have the 10 card draw that you need for your standard list. So I think there's so much like because like you can one back, draw 3 and put 2 back. Like
Right. So instead of having a Treasure Cruise, I would rather have another spell that copies my commander, because that's almost always going to be, strictly speaking, better, because it's going to give me another chance to continue the combo. Whereas Treasure Cruise is just going to draw me 3 cards. So that's something definitely that, as a strength, it draws a lot of cards.
right.
So for weaknesses, and I'm sure everybody's already bleeding in the ears listening to us talk about it. The deck is complicated. You have to pay a lot of attention. It requires an extraordinary amount of attentiveness to pilot it and feel like you are making effective choices. So I have to be really on the ball in order to play this deck. And it is also very dependent on the commander. Like I don't really see the deck doing much of anything if somebody is able to kind of hold me off from getting my commander. The deck is built to avoid that, but it is something that can happen sometimes. People could shut me out of casting my commander, and if that is the case, it would be a lot harder for me to get my game plan going. So I think that's the kind of commander I want to play, though, where my deck is really depending on my commander to do stuff. It's not just a good stuff pile. It's I'm trying to make my commander the center of it pile. So it is a weakness that can be exploited, but it's not something I would change.
Right. So here's the thing, though. Like, eventually you'll get to 9 mana on the battlefield, and then you'll just say, "Oh, I'll cast Automatu's Augury without my commander."
That's right.
Still seems scary. So, it's a weakness, but I don't think it's anything that you need to worry about or change. So, Tim, why don't you give us one of the cards that you might change in the future, that you might want to add into the future?
So this is really just a quality of life upgrade. I wasn't able to get these cards when I first put it into the deck, and I really, I do believe that they belong in it, no question, because there's no downside to it. And it is the lands that are also sacrifice outlets. There's 2 that immediately come to mind. The first one being High Market, and the second one being Phyrexian Tower. So to give you the example, Phyrexian Tower is a legendary land, and you can tap it, sacrifice a creature, and add 2 black mana to your mana pool. So it also taps for a colorless as well. So the benefit of it is just I have another free sack outlet. You can only use it once, but I gotta tell you, like, having it once really, really matters.
All you need sometimes.
Yeah.
Because that gets your ball rolling, right?
It does, because at that point, like, if what I've got on the top of the library is a reanimation spell, I get to, or a copy spell, and I've got the Feign Death in hand, like, being able to sacrifice it once gets the circle started. So I'd like to add probably both of those lands at some point in the near future.
Yeah, and they're easy. They're definitely easy adds too. Like, you just take out 2 basic lands and your problem solved. So
yep.
So I actually have 2 cards for you here. Since your deck does play a lot of spells in a single turn, in like the fact that like you're casting your Feign Death, you get your Brainstorm, you cast the spell for free, which also gets you to Brainstorm. Since you're casting a lot of spells, I think a card that would work really well is Mind's Desire. It is a 6 mana spell. It's a sorcery, and it says, shuffle your library, then exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Storm. So if he has 3 spells that he casts before this, he's going to get 4 copies of this effect. So I just think it's fantastic. It's doing what your commander does. Yes, it's random and you can't set it up, but spin the wheel, baby. Let's go. And then the other card I have here for you is we have Connive to Concoct. The reason why I put this on the list is one, it is a 9 mana spell technically because it is a double-faced card. So when figuring out the CMC or the mana value of the card, it puts both of them together. The first one, Connive, is gain control of target creature with power 2 or less. Not the important side. The other side is the better side of the two. And you get to choose which side you cast off of your commander. It's Surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's another reanimate effect that allows you to just keep that ball rolling, and it deals a lot of damage on top of all of that.
Yeah, I think they're both fantastic choices. Just a small correction on what you were saying, just for the listeners. Connive Concoct is not a double face card; it's a split card.
Sorry, thank you.
And really, the distinction is important because double face cards don't act in this way, but split cards do. If you have cards that have 2 things on the same side, such as Connive Concoct, an example that's in the deck is Commit to Memory, which is it's not a split card, it's an aftermath card, but both halves of the card are on the front. So when it checks the spell, it sees both halves and it adds the mana value of both. And I mean, Connive Concoct is a great idea. I think that I like it a lot because I think it slots in fairly well. I'm already kind of looking at like, do I have a reanimate spell that I could consider taking out? This would be a little bit more effective then. And I think the answer is maybe. And this ultimately it pings people for more damage, almost twice as much as some of the cheaper reanimate spells, so lots of benefit there. And I love the random aspect of Mind's Desire. Like, I love spinning the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think that was a pretty solid one as well. At 6 mana is actually like, kind of middly as far as the deck is concerned, but still very strong. And again, if I get a whole bunch of other spell casts off it, could be very, very powerful. I like it.
And the best part is both those cards are really cheap.
They are, yeah. They're both, less than $1 each. So yeah. I could go out and spend $1 today and pick up both those cards and see if they make sense.
Let's do it. Anyway.
Great. So moving on, I'm gonna hand it back over to Zombie here, and we're gonna talk about a deck that he has been playing for quite some time. So start out, please tell us who your commander is.
Windgrace forever. My commander is Lord Windgrace. He is one of my brainchilds that has been in existence for, what year did he come out? 2015, 2016?
Sure.
Whatever year the Planeswalker commanders were, that's when that brainchild has been. But like we'll mention later, it used to be something else, and then it morphed into this the second this got revealed. So the rule 0 conversation that I have with this deck is it is a very powerful deck. There is fast mana. However, it's not a CEDH deck. It snowballs, and it's a very powerful deck. So please, I'm public enemy number 1. Let's go ahead and get this perfectly clear.
So I mean, this is a conversation we've talked about plenty already on our own podcast, and lots of other people talk about this as well. You tell people that this is not CDH. How would you explain that to them, or how would you kind of make the argument that you don't consider it to be CDH?
So CDH, for me, you have to be able to consistently win before turn 4. I can do very powerful things. I can hardcast the Eldrazi Titan before turn 4. But that doesn't immediately win you the game. So the amount of time that it takes me to win is a little bit longer than what CDH is. And there's some cards that I just don't run that would make it CDH. Like the 2 red counter spells that counter blue spells or destroy blue permanents. Veil Summer is another perfect example of a CDH card that could fit in this deck really well, but I just choose not to run it because I like to do bigger, splashier things instead of being more low to the ground and more focused.
I think the tough part is the tough sell is some of the fast mana in it, and it does. And I
Right.
think your argument's really solid, though, that when it comes to CEDH, you're almost always going to accelerate into a game-winning combo as fast as you can. That's how most of those decks are going to win. And this deck is not necessarily trying to do that. It's trying to do these bigger and splashier things that aren't necessarily going to win you the game immediately, but are going to be a lot of fun along the way. So, and this is, definitely high up in the power level. I do think that there are times when this deck has a like 9 on the 10 scale performance, but
It's not consistent enough to be a solid 9.
Right.
I tell people it's a very high 8 though.
Right. That's the perfect recipe scenario where everything goes just absolutely right. And that's not always going to be the case. So what was it that attracted you to this commander?
Boy, let me tell you, I love lands, and I love them in play. I love them in my graveyard. I love switching them up. I love everything that involves lands. And this deck has this perfect little land dance. That's what I call it. It's a land dance. Because one turn I'll have 7 lands in here, and then the next turn I'll have 6 different lands in play. Yes, it might be less than what I started with, but yes, it does happen. So it's just the fact that I can do all these cool things with lands. It's just so much fun. And I really love big, impactful spells. Like, let me tell you, like, I just love having a lot of mana because I have a theory when it comes to Magic the Gathering. Whoever spends the most mana wins the game. And I like to get big numbers of mana, never infinite mana, because that's no fun. Infinite mana is easy. Huge numbers is a bit more difficult, and that's what I like to see.
It's true. And like this deck, I think, is one of the clearest examples of that amongst some of the decks that we play, is that this one does that job incredibly well, gets to an abusive amount of mana, and it just wins games as a result because you are doing more than everybody else is.
Yeah.
So in its current, so what was there a theme that you built around, a limit that you applied to it when you were building this deck, or even kind of as you played it over time?
So the main theme of the deck is I just wanted to see how busted the land strategy could be in Commander. Turns out it's pretty busted. And there was one rule that I wanted to I want to make this perfectly clear. There is no Scoot Swarm. I repeat, no Scoot Swarm. That's just too much math. Because way too much math. Because I'm talking like I'm putting 20 lands in a single turn and play at once. You do the math. I don't want to do that. No Scoot Swarm. Don't ask for it. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, if we don't have a computer doing the math for us, the card's not going in there.
Definitely not.
I'll break a computer with that card, but I'm not going to break people with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so give us the breakdown. What are the standout cards, the highlights among all the different kind of card categories we talk about?
So the first category is card draw. I have 8 with my commander, but like my card draw is very repeatable. So I don't necessarily need to have it. I mean, I do have a decent amount of tutors too, and very repeatable tutors as well. So it kind of like balances out. This is the number that's going to scare everyone. And no, it's not too much. I have 23 ramp spells in this deck. That's including my commander because like he's adding lands and stuff like that. So there's so much ramp in this deck, and I love it so much.
I know we talked about this particular stat quite a lot leading up to this recording. That like what counts as ramp, and I know that I encouraged you to like if you think it does, if you're asking the question, just say yes. Because I'm curious to know how many cards like push that ball forward, even if it's in a weird or different way.
Yeah. There's definitely some weird ones, but 23. 23 is the answer. And it's a lot. Don't tell me to remove some because it's never gonna happen. I have 6 targeted removal. Some's very expensive, but when you're spending 40 mana a turn, Okay. And then I have 8 board wipes. Because surprisingly, there's not too many creatures in the deck, and I'm not producing too many tokens of creatures. So sometimes I just need to say reset. So yeah, those are the stats.
So, how would you describe the goal overall of the deck?
So the goal of the deck is to ramp into really big dumb spells. Puts like land matter cards in there, and instead of making a whole bunch of tokens and swinging, because that can be kind of boring, I deal my damage through different ways of putting my lands into play. And then gotta have the turbo fog because it's really easy in this deck and it's so much fun. And then have a great value engine, and I have to finish the game with that land dance, and I'll explain how that works later on. So to go into the ramps category, since it is a quarter of the deck, I figured I would break it down into 2 different categories. I have fast ramp and big ramp. My fast ramp are going to be Lotus Cobra and Tireless Provisioner. Lotus Cobra is a 2-mana 2/1 snake. Has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And then Tireless Provisioner is something very similar. It's a 3-mana 3/2 Elf Scout. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or treasure token. Honestly, I didn't know it said food until about a couple of days ago.
I know. Most
Like,
people don't.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I did not know it said food.
There are food matters deck out there, but if you're not that, you're never you're I mean almost never. 95% of the time it's
here's the
treasure.
interesting thing. I kill myself with this deck. I have a lot of things that make me
Right.
deal damage to myself. So when you have a lot of mana, sometimes I might just say, "Yo, I need to gain like 6 life yesterday." So
Right.
it's
You have the
something that I
option.
have to consider in the future when I'm playing this deck. Other fast mana that I have is Mox Diamond and Mana Crypt. So Mox Diamond is actually like my favorite kind of like fast mana for this deck because it fits so well into my strategy since I am trying to put lands into my graveyard. I'm also trying to bring them back from my graveyard to play. Mox Diamond is a 0-mana artifact, and it says if Mox Diamond would enter the battlefield, you may discard a land card instead. If you do, put Mox Diamond onto the battlefield. If you don't, put it into its owner's graveyard. And then it taps to add 1 mana of any color. So it's a 0 costing mana 0 mana cost mana rock. Sorry, there was a lot of word manas in there and it threw me off. Anyway, it's a 0 cost mana rock. Like, of course it's fast mana. It's great. It fits with the theme of the deck so well. And the other one is Mana Crypt. We all know it. We all love it. It lightning bolts you in the face every turn because that's how lucky I am. And it produces 2 mana for 0 mana. So just really fast mana. So like there's times where I'm getting Windgrace on turn 2. Never done turn 1 because I don't have a Jeweled Lotus, but something I can look into in the future.
Yeah, I think what I love about things like Lotus Cobra and Tireless Provisioner, and I know this is we're not shocking anybody with this observation, but they scale really well. So when you get to that point where you are reanimating all the lands from your graveyard or doing something like Scape Shift, like the amount of value that you generate in the late game. So they're great for getting you kind of started, but they also carry you through that mid part of the game so effectively. Like they're just absolutely the all-stars in a deck like this.
So now we're gonna move into the big ramp category. The first one on my list is Tempt with Discovery. The reason why I put this here is because it searches for any land. I have multiple lands that tap for multiple mana, like Ancient Tomb, Scorched Ruins, and then the next 2 cards on my list is Cabal Coffers and Urborg, because if you say yes to this, you lost. Please say yes. I asked you out of the kindness of my heart, and if you don't
It's
say yes,
funny.
it makes me sad.
I definitely we play at the same table all the time, and I always talk people out of saying yes to this. And there's a part of me that's like, I'm gonna start talking people into saying yes.
I just want to see what happens, right?
Right. Like I know that because really you're right. Like if you get one person to say yes, you're way
It's
ahead.
GG's. It's
Because you're
GG's.
getting Cabal Coffers and Urborg. Like you're getting so but like I really kind of wonder, it's like if one person says yes, I feel like everybody should.
So here is the best solution. Everyone says yes, but they get strip mines, ghost quarters, field of ruins, and just destroy the lands that I search for.
I don't play with those cards enough, and I'm gonna start doing that.
Yep, yep.
That's my addition from this.
So that's the best way to handle it. But my favorite way is everyone says yes, and then I just win.
Yep.
Uh, so let's go ahead and go into the Cabal Coffers and Urborg. Everyone should know what these two cards do together. It's pretty disgusting. But Cabal Coffers reads, it's just a land. It doesn't tap for mana or anything by itself. I have to pay 2 and tap it, and then it adds 1 black for each swamp I control, and Urborg turns all my lands into swamps. So why this is such a big number for, or like such a big ramp spell for me, even though it's not a spell. I do it multiple times in a single turn. Like I'll activate Cabal Coffers, cast crop rotation, activate my commander to bring 2 lands back, and now I have 45 mana because sorry. Whoopsies, I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the last big ramp spell that I have, it's a new edition and I have yet to play it, but I'm looking really forward to doing this. Is Awaken the Woods. So Awaken the Woods is a 2 green X sorcery, and it says create X/1/1 green forest dryad land creature tokens. So they're lands, which is pretty fantastic. So it's gonna help with my value engine things. It's gonna help with my landfall things. And sometimes when I'm casting this, I could cast it for 30 pretty easily. Now I have 31 ones that people have to contend with.
I don't know why they printed this card.
I don't know why either, but it's amazing, and I thank you to the
strong.
Wizards of the Coast Gods. I appreciate you for making Windgrace
Man,
disgusting.
it's so nuts, and I also look forward to seeing this with with
Like
all of the there's so many different things that this could just be way like we just talked about Lotus Cobra and Tireless Provisioner. If you have either of those on the battlefield, however many lands you just put in, you're paying two green and doubling your mana. And you have one sticking around to end any of the other things that you have on board. Then, which a couple of things you'll talk about, I'm sure.
yeah, for sure.
Ob Nixilis comes to mind.
Yeah. And I forgot to bring up a card which I should probably search for. Is Prismatic Omen. It doesn't really fit in this section, but it turns all my lands into all land types. So
Right.
there's a couple of cards that I will mention later that will explain what I mean by that.
Absolutely.
So the next the next section of the category of my deck is big dumb spells. Turns out I have a lot of them and I love them. And the first one is the most anticlimactic way this deck can win, but why not? The card's Torment of Hailfire. It's 2 black and X for sorcery. It says repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So when I play this for 40 on turn 6, you can win me the game pretty easily.
And does.
Usually.
I think I've seen Torment of Hailfire win more games than with that deck than just
right.
about
I
any
mean, this has been the longest lasting win con in the deck. The other ones I put in are relatively new. I changed it. We'll discuss that later on. The next big dumb spell on our list is Kozilek, the Butcher of Truth. Let's be real. I don't look at him as a 10 mana 12/12 Indestructible Annihilator 4, I look at him as a draw spell. It's just the coolest draw spell I could think of. I mean, I want to draw 4 cards. It's great. And then he does have a clause in here, which can be helpful because I do sometimes get myself into a bind where I have like no cards left in my library. When Kozilek Butcher of Truth is put into the graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles their graveyard into their library. So I have protected myself from milling myself as well with Kozilek.
Oh, yeah.
The next big dumb spell is my favorite removal spell of all time. It would be Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. When you cast Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, exile 2 target permanents. He is a 10/10 indestructible. And whenever Ulamog attacks defending player, exile the top 20 cards of his or her line. So it technically was a misplay, but I have killed people with the exile triggers of Ulamog. Someone decided to immediately pact a negation, not even waiting for my targets. Then I asked how many blue sources he had, and he only had 2. So he didn't have them to pay for pact and negation. It's a really interesting way to win the game. Well, eliminate a player. And then this is like my favorite tutor of the deck. It is a big dumb creature, but it is Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. He is a 8 mana, 5 generic, 3 black legendary creature demon. He is an 8/8 flying trample. I can pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a card, and put that card into your hand. I don't have too many creatures, so sometimes I'm only searching for 1 or 2 cards, but really, do you need more? And then the last big dumb spell is Finale of Devastation. It's 2 green and X sorcery. Search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less. You put that card onto the battlefield. If you search your library, shuffle it. If X is 10 or greater, creatures you control get +X and gain haste until end of turn. So most of the time, I'm not casting this as a big dumb spell. I'm usually using it to find a value engine piece, which I'm about to jump into next. But I usually use it just as a tutor to get a creature into play. But sometimes you have just an over-absorbent amount of creatures, and you just need to smash face. The next section we have going on in my Windgrace deck is the value engine. The first card I'm going to talk about first is honestly the most important value engine piece. There's other pieces that kind of fill the same slot, but this is my most important and my favorite one. It is the Gitrog monster. There is CDH decks. I don't have that CDH combo in the deck. I figured that would be boring. But he is a 5 mana 6/6 legendary creature Frog Horror. He is a 6/6 Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land for on each of your turns, and then whenever 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So since this deck is like the land dancey kind of thing, there's a lot of lands going into my graveyard. So there's a lot of cool interactions. Like even if I discard a land card with Windgrace, it's discard a land, draw 3 cards now. I crack a fetch land, I draw a card. Like there's just so many incidental times where lands are going into my graveyard that just draws me so many cards.
Yeah, we know that Gitrog Monster is a value engine in a vacuum. Like it by itself will create value for you. You have all of these support pieces in place. It just breaks it. It is so powerful when you are playing with all these support pieces. And it's true about some of the other points that some of the other guys on your value engine list is that they're there for a reason because all of these support pieces make them way more powerful, and they're powerful enough by themselves.
Right. So like I almost consider the Gitrog monster as my hidden commander.
Right.
Just because I think it's a lot of fun. Sometimes I won't search them out. Like sometimes I'll just like play it as the cards come. like that's how I like lower the power level if I notice the table not keeping up as well. Like I'll just avoid using my tutors and I'll just let the cards come as they come. Um,
Hmm.
so the next card on my list is Corvold, Fey Cursed King. Uh, we know him, we love him, and we all hate him. Like there's no denying this. So he is a 5 mana dragon. He is 2 black, red, green. He is a 4/4 flyer. Whenever Corvold the Fey King enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Corvold and draw a card. There's so many times where I cast him and he's a 10/10 on the same turn.
I feel like this Corvold, especially if it's not. I've seen people play with this card as their commander quite a lot, and for you, it's another one of those cards that's in the value engine thing. This card is so nuts that people miss the trigger.
I miss it a lot.
Like everybody does because it is because it happens so much, and it's that same feeling I was talking about earlier where it's like I have so many cards in my hand, I'm not paying attention. Like when you're short on cards, you pay attention to every
Oh,
card you draw.
oh yeah.
But when you got a grip, you're just like, I don't know, did he trigger 6 times or 4 times last turn? I don't care.
Oh, doesn't really matter, right? So, yeah, like as I said, my card draw in this deck is very, very repeatable.
Yep.
So, yeah, I only have 8, but when I get him, my grip is so full, I have no idea what to do with it. That's why I
Yep.
want to, get like 80 mana each turn because then I can cast them all.
Right.
The next card on my list, this is not as scary as the last few that I played, but still a very good card nonetheless. It is Tireless Tracker. He is a 3 mana, 2 colorless, 1 green. He is a human scout. He has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. So you create a clue token that you can. It's an artifact. You can pay 2 and sacrifice it to draw a card. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. So, like, even if you put like 2 of these pieces together, like if you put Tireless Tracker and Corvold all in the same place, like I play a fetch land, get a clue, sack that fetch land, draw a card, get another clue, sack a clue, draw a card, 2 +1/+1 counters. Um, that's why it's a value engine and not just draw. Uh, so this is where I kind of want to talk about like the prismatic omen that I mentioned earlier, and like Urborg, and then I also have the Yavimaya land as well. For cards like this, Dread Presence. It's a 4 mana. It's 3 generic and 1 black. It's a nightmare. Whenever a swamp enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. You may draw a card and lose a life. Red Present can also deal 2 damage to any target, and I gain 2 life. So, again, like the incidental life gain is super sweet. Being able to ping off creatures is awesome as well. But also, just having a crapload of card draw is pretty sweet too. So, again, when all your lands become swamps, like this is triggering multiple times a turn. And then the last card on our list is one of my favorites. It is Vilus, Broker of Blood. He is a 8 mana, 5 generic, 3 black, legendary creature demon. He is an 8/8 flyer. I can pay a black and pay 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. So this is just like, I'm already killing myself. I might as well draw cards while I'm doing it.
It feels like your value engine pieces have a theme.
Draw lots of cards.
Do they
Yeah.
all draw cards?
Yeah, it turns out my that drawing cards revs my engine. So
Yeah, yeah. So it's have lots of mana, draw lots of cards, win
play
game.
all cards. Yeah, it's
Magic is
super,
easy.
yeah, right. No, definitely not. And then my next part of the section that I don't really need this part in the deck, but I think it's hilarious, and I have won games because of it, and then I've thought I was going to win and lost spectacularly because of it. So this is my Turbo Fog section. So there's only 2 cards in this section in the whole entire deck, but they're both really good and reusable. So the first card on my list is Glacial Chasm. It is a land. It has cumulative upkeep, pay 2 life. Whenever it enters the battlefield, sacrifice a land. Creatures you control can attack and prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. So it doesn't protect my commander, but who cares? I just want to recast them anyway. It doesn't tap for mana unless if Urbor, Gavamayo, or Prismatic Omen are out, or like the Dryad guy as well. So that is something you have to consider. But it's also doing a lot of the things that I wanted to do anyway. It's making me sacrifice a land. It sacrifices itself. So a lot of the times I play it, I Turbo Fog, I return it back without even paying any life because I'll just say, oh, let it die. Then I'll bring it back from my graveyard and just do it again. That's generally how that works. So I'm just not taking damage, and it's so hilarious. And who needs to attack to win? I got other ways to win. It's all right.
Yeah, not this deck.
No, definitely not this deck. The last card on the list for my Turbo Fog deck or Turbo Fog section is Constant Miss. This card is so good. It's from Stronghold. One of my favorite cards in the deck. It's a 2-mana fog, but creatures deal no combat damage this turn, but it has buyback, sacrifice a land. So there has been times where I just cast it just to sacrifice a land. I'll do it on my turn. Like, I don't need to attack you. I'm going to Constant Miss and I want my land in my graveyard.
Yeah.
So good.
I just got to point out, it's hilarious that you refer to 2 cards as Turbo Fog. And
but it's so repeatable.
Yeah, you're not off base. That's kind of my point, is that, like, normally Turbo Fog means that you have a lot of fog effects in your deck. And you don't. You have 2. But
there's the keyword.
Right. They are repeatable effects. And I've seen them work. I mean, Glacial Chasm is so strong in a deck like this, where it really it ends up being very much like a Pillow Fort situation, where if people can't interact with it, and this kind of brings up that point we kind of jokingly brought up earlier, people may not be playing with targeted land destruction, and maybe you need to reconsider it, because they're definitely, like, having that one effective demolition field or something of that nature in your deck, can be really important in situations such as this. Like, you not being able to get rid of that Glacial Chasm makes it so other people can't interact with you, and so it's incredibly effective and hilarious that it's a Turbo Fog section with 2 cards.
All right, I do want to bring up the coolest way that I've lost because of my Turbo Fog section. I had a crop rotation in my hand. I only have like 2 life left, right? And someone attacks me to try to kill me. I crop rotation into Glacial Chasm. Sacrifice the land, do all the things that are necessary. The next guy in the turn order phased out my land and then killed me.
I remember.
It was the coolest way to die of all time.
He phased out your land.
Phased out my land. So nasty. So we're gonna get into the next part of the deck list, and this is the favorite part of like my favorite part of the deck, and it's just so much fun to do. And that is the land dance. I alluded to it before, and here's the cards that really put all that together. The first card on my list is Scape Shift. If you're a modern player, you probably know what this card does, but I'm going to tell you about it. It is 2 colorless and 2 green mana. It is a sorcery. I sacrifice any number of lands, search your library for up to that many land cards, and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. One card that I didn't forgot to bring up during this with this card is Amulet of Vigor. It's just so fantastic. I'll sack 10 lands. They all come into play. They all enter tap, and then they untap, and it's just GG's, boys. GG's. But this like every time that I've cast this, I always sacrifice all my lands. And then I just get all the lands that I want. So it's pretty fantastic. Now, if I'm sacrificing that many lands, I do need to get all those land backs, and this is the perfect card to do it. And that is Splendid Reclamation. It's a 4-mana sorcery, and it says return all lands cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Because why not? Right? The next part, this is also a really good card for the land dance. It helps put it's fast mana. Well, fast mana is not the right word. It is fast ramp. And it puts the lands in my graveyards. It's squandered resources. It's a great enchantment that everyone forgets about from Visions. It's a black and a green. It's an enchantment, and I sacrifice a land to add add 1 mana of any type that the sacrificed land could produce. Play this ability as a mana source. So it even split second can't stop it from happening. Dude, let me tell you, there's times where it's like I'm going to Splendid Reclamation with the next card here, Titania, Protector of Argoth. I didn't even get it. So what she does is when she enters the battlefield, she brings a land from my graveyard to play. But when lands go into the graveyard, I get 5/3 elementals. So like I could just be like, oh, I'm gonna sacrifice all my lands, get a whole bunch of 5/3s, bring them all back, do it again. I have all this mana to do whatever I want with, and 50 bajillion 5/3s. 50 bajillion is a bit of a strong number, but
I mean the math checks out. You're
Math
fine.
checks out.
You're fine.
The next section of cards in this section is there's 3 cards that do basically all the same thing. One's a creature, one's an artifact, and 2 of them are artifacts. The first one is Ramonat Excavator. The second one is Crucible of Worlds, and then the last one I want to bring up and actually read is Conduit of Worlds. I should probably search that up. I didn't for some reason. But it's a 4-mana artifact. It's 2 colorless and 2 green. I can play lands from my graveyard as if they were in my hands. And if I have nothing else better to do, I can tap it and cast a spell from my graveyard. Pretty fantastic. Permanent, thank you. But I can't cast anything that turn. So, but sometimes there's times where I just didn't get any of my draw. I'm sitting there with 0 cards in my hands. I would love to just get access to one of my cards that I put in my.
You can do a lot without casting spells. And so like really that drawback isn't as much of a drawback if the one thing that you're casting is Gitrog Monster or or Corvold or recasting your commander because you decided to let it go back, or any of the demons that do things that have activated abilities. Like there's lots of other things that you could do. So Conduit and really like having it cost 1 more than Crucible just isn't that big of a drawback for this deck.
Doesn't matter.
Really 1 more mana doesn't matter at all.
Doesn't matter at all.
So that's it, right? For the land dance section.
That's the land dance.
So let's talk then about like how has this deck changed over time? Because I know that you have this story is quite a bit longer than the one that I brought up.
Yeah, for sure.
So how has this deck changed over time?
So this was actually the second deck that I built. It started off as Omnath Locus of Rage when it came out in the Zendikar Rising, I think it was.
That sounds right.
So it started off as making a whole bunch of 5/5s. It started off with like Kadama's Reach, Cultivates, like search for basic lands. I had 30 something basic lands and there was like 50 lands, and it was just I'm gonna ramp out to Omnath, and then I'm just gonna ramp some more, and then I'm gonna draw cards because my creatures have 5 power. But then I saw my dear old friend Lord Windgrace, and it just struck a chord in my heart. And I'm like, I love putting lands in my graveyard. I want them back. It seems so good. So I had to add black. And the funny thing is I basically removed all the red.
Yeah.
There's only I think there's 6 red mana symbols in the whole entire deck. But um during the Windgrace life cycle, it started off as a token deck where it's just like it's all the landfall creatures that make creatures. I had like Avenger Zendikar, Craterhoof, I had all those things. I was like, this isn't fun anymore. Like I just wanted to try it out or try something different. So for a while I called it Turbo Titan because I had nothing like a whole bunch of stupid big tentacle monsters that I just wanted to cast as fast as I can, and it could consistently cast an Eldrazi Titan on turn 3, like hard cast from my hand. Um, so but again, it was just I had trouble finishing the game because once you see one tentacle monster, you become public enemy number 1. And honestly, attacking people with 10/10s and 12/12s isn't the fastest way to win the game.
No.
So I decided to switch it to more of a lands matter deck again, and I wanted to switch to uh cards like what was it, Dread Presence, Valakut, uh Valakut, which is if you have mountains, it deals 3 lightning bolts people with mountains. And like Ob Nixilis is whenever a land enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 3 life, and it gets 3 counters. So I wanted to do more things like that, and just because I keep ending up with really really big creatures, I put a Chandra's Ignition, which is I didn't look it up, but basically I have it a creature's power deal damage to each of my opponents and all the creatures. So when you have a 2020 Corvold, it's taken out most of the people.
Yeah, either Nixilis is a good target for that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, both of them get pretty big, or Ulvenwald Hydra for that matter. You have a couple of real good targets for
Yeah.
Chandra's Ignition.
Yeah. So that's when I changed to that. I have been enjoying the deck a lot more now than I was when it was Turbo Titan. And yeah.
Great. So what do you consider to be the strengths and weaknesses of it in its current form?
So one of its major strengths is it snowballs very, very quickly. Um, like the things that I have done on turn 3, on turn 4 is completely absurd. Uh, it's capable of casting really big spells really early. Those are like the 2 main strengths of it. But one of the weaknesses, there's lots of triggers and it's easy to miss some of them. And there's lots of choices that I make, so I end up taking long turns. So it's kind of a hard deck to play against because it's like, okay, well, trying to come up with the best line and knowing all the cards in the deck basically makes it very difficult to like, okay, well, if I draw this, I'm going to do this. Like you start formulating plans, even if like you're trying to plan out if you draw these cards, this is what you're going to do. Sometimes I think I need to tone that back a little bit to make it just like, okay, I'm doing this and not worry about playing the best line.
It's so hard. Like that is the tightrope walk that we're all on though, isn't it? And
It is.
the question of, I don't want to just make the same linear decisions every time. I want to feel like I'm figuring stuff out every time. But I also don't want to be the person that's taking that gigantically long turn and kind of making everybody else sit around because I know I don't like it when it happens to me. So that is the tightrope walk. I feel the same way. It didn't do this on purpose, but we both chose similar decks in that way. Like we chose decks that cast big, very, very big splashy spells, but that have a lot of triggers and a lot of choices to make and that you can miss. Like the strengths and weaknesses that we both identified really like they're incredibly similar and
Right.
and that same tightrope walk that we got to talk about and you and I talk about this all the time and I believe this is true about a lot of people. I know we got a little bit of feedback on threat assessment how people
Right.
are like, no, don't take other people's feelings into consideration, this is a game, it's
Sure.
cutthroat. I don't know what kind of games those people are playing because I don't really feel like people play that way.
That's not the games
I
I've been playing.
no, the commander games I play with people are a lot more kind of friendly, and in that regard, it's not as cutthroat. So you're making decisions based on kind of wanting to be a part of the group. Most of the time, and I know that's the kind of player I want to be, because this is not a competitive format. That's what CEDH is, right? And I do play some competitive Magic. This isn't that. So if I'm playing competitively, I'll have a different mindset. But when it's a casual, that means that we're gonna ask ourselves those questions.
I mean, half the time when we're playing, people are saying, "Do it for the content, baby."
Right, and we say the same thing. I want people to do the thing. I want them to feel good about doing that, and that's kind of why I call my shots as well. When I say, "Hey, I'm gonna do the crazy thing,"
Here
I'm
it
gonna
is.
here it is, like here it's coming. I get everybody ready for it. So, all right, so let's talk about changes. What are you thinking? Are there cards that you've identified that you maybe want to try in the deck in the future?
There's actually two that I'm actually considering. The first one is Soul of Windgrace. Whenever Soul of Windgrace enters the battlefield or attacks, you may put a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped under your control. I mean, it's
Can I
just
point something out?
yeah, go for it.
A graveyard.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Oh,
A
I didn't.
graveyard.
Oh damn.
Yeah, he can steal lands out of your opponent's graveyards.
Did not know that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I play him a little bit in standard, so that one comes up.
And then it also just has other good ways to put lands into my graveyard. Green and discard a land, gain 3 life. Don't know how often I'll do that, but again, there's times where I'm like at 2 and I'm like, the second one is probably the one I would use the most.
Yep.
Is discard a land, draw a card. And then the last one is discard a land card, Soul of Windgrace, gains indestructible until end of turn, and tap it.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know how important he would be to the whole value engine. He does a lot of cool things. It's something that I've considered putting in. But this is a spicy card that I never knew existed until yesterday.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I really want to get a second card. So I just started looking up I actually looked at the EDH rec of Windgrace, and I was like, oh, this card's hilarious. So the card is Rebuild the City. It is a 6 mana, 3 generic, black, red, green. Choose target land. Create 3 tokens that are copies of it, except they are 3/3 creatures in addition to their other types, and they have vigilance. So there's a couple things that I want to bring up while I'm talking about this card. So the first reason is because of this legendary creature. Pulling her up right now. God, stop taking forever. Is Aisha, Soul of the Wild. It turns all my creatures into lands. So I could choose one of my creatures. Like, oh, I don't know, Tireless Provisioner, Tireless Tracker. It can't be legendary, which a lot of my creatures are. But could you imagine having 3 Uvenwald Hydras, or I don't know, 3 more Dockside Extortionists? Seems really good. But there's also other lands in the deck that I wouldn't mind having 3 copies of. For instance, Lotus Field. Yes, I have to sacrifice 2 lands every time, but who cares?
Hold on. I got a target for you.
Field of the Dead.
Valakut.
Oh my god.
Valakut is
Coffers.
not. Yeah, Valakut is not legendary.
So like Field of the Dead is not legendary. Cabal Coffers is not legendaries. And boy, let me tell you, I would love to have 3 Cabal Coffers.
Yeah, the ones that I mean the ones that have that kind of affect the game state immediately definitely could be big hits for that.
I mean, just think about it. If I did Rebuild the City on Field of the Dead and I happen to have 7 lands of different names, I'm immediately getting I get 4 2/2 zombies for each one, so I'm getting 12 2/2 zombies on top of getting 3 Field of the Dead.
It's a little bummer that they doesn't give them haste.
It is kind of a bummer, but honestly, it's not like I plan on attacking with my lands anyway.
Well, you can't tap them for mana then.
That's true. That's
You
true.
can't use their activated abilities. That's kind of why I was thinking Valakut would be a good target for it.
Oh,
Because you
Valakut
don't.
would be great. I think Field of the Dead just because of how many
Yes,
times.
absolutely.
Like those
100%.
two are the best, but I wouldn't mind having 3 more Cabal coffers that I
Yeah,
don't get
just
until next turn.
yeah. Feels like that might be okay.
I think it might work.
So my suggestions for your deck are also new cards. And they're really just, I think the first one is kind of a layup. I think that it's a solid thing, adds some redundancy. I'm actually not even sure, although it's a fantastic card, I'm not even sure your deck needs it. And it is the new Nissa from Aftermath, and it's Nissa Resurgent Animist. And if you're paying attention to Magic content right now, you've heard of this card. It's making big splashes in a lot of places. So Nissa Resurgent Animist, 2 and a green, legendary creature, Elf Scout. It's got landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Then, if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, reveal cards from the top of your library till you reveal an elf or elemental card. Put that card into your hand, the rest on the bottom in the random order. 3/3. So, Lotus Cobra plus a little, costs 1 more. Important to know that the way that the wording on this card works is that when you get the second landfall trigger, you get the mana and you get to do the search thing. We looked at Zombie's list, and there's something like 5 creatures that second trigger could hit. But
Let's
seriously,
double check.
yeah, it was something like 5. I think we came up with. But the point is, it's not 0. So you could put this card in there immediately and end up with something like, is it better than Tireless Provisioner?
I would say no, because Tireless Provisioner leaves those treasures, so if I don't need them that particular turn, I can save it for later.
So maybe not better, but different, and really like same mana cost, bigger body, but also has that additional card draw.
I was about to say, it lets me draw 1 of 5 cards.
Right, very similar, and again, it's not you're drawing a random card; you're drawing one of these
5,
specific
yeah.
5
And
cards.
they're all really good. Like,
right.
there's no denying that the elementals and elves that I have in the deck aren't.
So I'd be interested to see. I'd be interested to see if this could fit in there as another piece of that kind of redundancy. But again, like you have so much of it already in there, they would be you always have a hard time pulling cards out of here. So that is a tough call to make. I'd be interested to see how that is, how that works differently. And the second card that I picked is similar in that way, in that it's incredibly similar to Finale of Devastation. Just the tail end of it ends up being a little bit different, and there's a couple of reasons I think this card might work well for you. So it's Invasion of Ikoria, and it is a battle. So it's X and 2 green, and it essentially does the same thing as the first half of Finale. So you search your and it's actually an ETB trigger. So X is the amount that you put into the spell. You search your library and or graveyard for a non-human creature with mana value X or less. Put it onto the battlefield. Shuffle your library. So no pump to your creatures, but your deck isn't really doing that anyway. You use Finale as a creature tutor a lot of the time. Right. So the back half of this card is what makes it something worth taking a look at. Obviously, that front half is great. You search for Get Rog Monster, search for Corval, find the non-human creature that's going to, kind of move you forward in your game plan. And then it is a battle, which means it has 6 defense counters on it. You got to do 6 damage to it to flip it. When you do 6 damage to it, you get to cast it again. The back of it is Xylortha, Apex of Ikoria. It is an 8/8 reach dinosaur. Here's the important part. For each non-human creature you control, you may have that creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked.
It just forgets about Tireless Tracker. What a jerk.
Right. So, but it doesn't forget about Ulvenwald Hydra. Doesn't forget about Obnixilis.
It doesn't forget about Violus or Ulamog or Get Rog Monster or
Right. Like all these gigantic monsters now are getting, and really like the two that I mentioned are important because they scale insanely
Right.
well. So, Ulvenwald Hydra's power and toughness equal to lands you have in play. This deck gets up to 20 plus consistently.
Right.
So swinging with a 20 late in the game, people's life totals are dwindling. Being able to flip this battle and then get your damage through unblocked, no matter how many blockers they have, it's a fantastic way to close out the game. And really, the thing I want to point out here, because this occurred to me a little while ago, is that I looked it up because I wasn't sure. So Valakut, the original printing of Valakut says 3 damage to a creature or player. It is absolutely errata to say any target.
Oh, I could hit the battle.
You could hit the battle. So you could cast this battle, and if it is a creature that brings lands into play, or if you can then get, Valakut with 2 landfall triggers, you could then immediately blast the 6 points off of this and get the battle. So, and get the flip half of it. So there's a very real scenario where you could play this card and get the back half benefit the turn that you play it, and close out the game that turn. And I say that because that's hard to do with battles, because usually you have to attack the battle and then you get to cast the back half of it after combat.
Yeah.
Or at the end of combat, effectively. But here, if you have a way around that, and you do, if you have a way around that, you could get the creature out, get the back half flip before combat, and close it all out in that turn. So I'd be very curious to see how this card could potentially play in your deck.
There is one bad thing about the Nissa. I prefer like the old border cards, right? And then art on the on the Nissa old border just isn't that good, and it makes me sad. That's the only downside. Great card, but the old border art is not very pretty.
I haven't. Oh, there is a retro.
Yeah,
hold on.
I don't like it.
I like the extended one.
Oh, I like the extended a lot too. But
fine. I could get there. I can see what you're saying. It's an artistic choice. It's definitely stylized in a way that the other one is not. I like the regular picture quite a lot.
For the longest time, I didn't run Dryad of Elysian Grove just because it was manhung. I couldn't do it. Like, I didn't do it, and then I started putting cards where like the land type mattered. I'm like, fine, I guess I'll put them in.
I guess I need this insanely good card that I wasn't playing because I don't like what it looks like.
Right. I mean, that's a fair thing to think, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
All right.
So that unless you have more, it's time. Let's scoop it up for the day. Okay, so to scoop things up, thank you kindly as always, everybody, for spending time with us here at the AZA Commander Podcast. I want to give you one final reminder that you can support this show and all of our other content by watching this and other videos on the YouTube page, by checking out our streams on Twitch. Links in the description.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
See ya.